They didn't just cross the line, they shattered it, right there in front of 30 Marines. Corporal Deeks looked Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves in the eye, and spit in her face, not behind her back, not in some locker room rumor, face to face in the mess tent while everyone watched, as he smirked and said, "Now she'll bark." But she didn't. She stood up, told him to clean the floor, and walked out like she hadn't just been disrespected in front of 50 witnesses. But what none of them knew was that she wasn't walking away from the humiliation. She was walking toward the correction. And by nightfall, every man who laughed, mocked, or stayed silent would learn exactly what it meant to disrespect a Navy SEAL. Now, before we get into what happens when you mistake a Navy SEAL's silence for weakness, make sure you've hit subscribe with the bell icon turned on, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, and get ready. Because this isn't about revenge, it's about what happens when you spit in the face of the wrong damn woman. The fog came in low that morning across Pier 43, thick with salt and diesel fumes. You could taste the Pacific before you saw it, metallic, heavy, clinging to your tongue like you'd licked a handful of pennies. Somewhere east of the loading docks, drill sergeants were already barking cadence. Boots hit pavement in rhythm, breath timed with orders. The whole base smelled like sweat, gun oil, and old concrete. Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves stepped off the personnel carrier at 0730 sharp. Clipboard tucked under one arm, uniform creased where it should be, faded where it had been earned. Her rank insignia caught just enough morning light to flash silver, but she didn't stop to adjust it. She didn't stop for anything. 36 years old, lean, precise, the kind of posture that didn't ask for respect. It assumed you already knew better. That her, someone muttered from the loading ramp, a young Marine, couldn't have been more than 20, leaned toward his buddy, helmet sitting crooked over nervous eyes. Heard she got her trident after some blast in Kandahar. Never saw real action. Just rode a desk after her ribs went. Behind them, Gunnery Sergeant Pierce stood with his arms folded, thick across the shoulders, sleeves rolled high to show off forearms that looked more ego than effort. He didn't bother whispering. Never had to. "Promotion by paperwork," Pierce said, loud enough for half the yard to hear. "That's what the Navy calls merit now." Nyla didn't respond, didn't even glance over. She just crossed the lot, boots steady on cracked asphalt, and stepped up to the mobile briefing platform, laid her clipboard flat. The conversations around her didn't stop immediately, but they thinned out, got quieter, like someone had turned the volume knob halfway down without anyone noticing. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, clear, not loud, but it carried. "Alpha Unit, roll call starts now. Say your name. Say it loud. Say it like the uniform you're wearing actually means something." They did, one by one, stumbling a little, not confident, but they said it. She marked each name as it came. No feedback, no commentary, just pen on paper, steady and rhythmic. When she reached the end, she paused for exactly one beat. "Welcome to Phase 2, she said. "This week's not about what you can say. It's about what you can prove. And it starts with who you follow, even when they're not the loudest voice in the room." She turned, folded the drill sheet in half, and handed it directly to Pierce, deliberately. Eye contact held just a second too long. He took it, looked down at it, looked back up. His jaw worked twice before settling into that half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's see what the clipboard queen teaches us today, boys." A few laughs followed, thin ones, the kind people make when they're not sure if they should. Nyla stepped off the platform without a word. She didn't need to say anything else. The pier had already heard her once. That was enough. By 0900 hours, the heat had settled over the training range like a low fever. The mock urban structures shimmered at the edges, plywood facades, concrete barriers, training dummies slumped in doorways like casualties, waiting to be discovered. The whole place smelled like gunpowder residue and sweat-soaked gear. Lieutenant Commander Reeves stood at the south gate, stopwatch in one hand, arms behind her back. The first breach team moved on her signal. Four-man stack, rifles up, spacing already too tight before they even hit the door. They broke entry on command. The lead Marine botched the angle, exposed his left side completely. The second one tripped over debris instead of clearing the corner. Their communication was all panic and elbows. When they dragged the civilian dummy out, its fake torso was bent at a 90-degree angle. Neela clicked the stopwatch. 17 seconds. That's a fail. Gunnery Sergeant Pierce, standing 2 rows back with his arms crossed, smirked. They made it through, didn't they? Nyla turned slightly, voice even. You don't get credit for surviving a breach you caused. Reset the room. The second team moved into position. Same mistakes. This time worse because they were rushing. Nyla let it run, didn't interrupt, didn't correct, just watched, stopwatch ticking in her hand like a metronome of judgment. Then she stepped forward. Drop your gear. I'll demonstrate. No theatrics, no announcement, just motion. She approached the breach point alone. No backup, no staging. 2 pivots, a shoulder roll, entry low and fast. Her hand transitioned from rifle prop to disarm baton before the second dummy would have had time to react. The hostage extraction she performed was textbook. Knee under the shoulder blade, elbow locked, spine supported, drag clean and controlled. When she stepped back out, the stopwatch read 6 seconds. One of the younger Marines at the back exhaled audibly. Holy! Neela handed the weapon prop back to the range assistant without looking at him. Next group, load up. Pierce tilted his head, smile still tight on his face. Looks real smooth when nobody's shooting back. Neela didn't blink. Discipline before contact, Sergeant. That's how you stay alive long enough to get shot at. The line of Marines behind Pierce went quiet. Not scared quiet, thinking quiet. The kind where something shifts behind people's eyes, and they start measuring the gap between what they thought they knew and what just got demonstrated in 6 seconds. Neela glanced at the range clock. Third team, up, and I expect silence while you load your gear. She stepped off the line and resumed her position behind the clipboard, not because she needed the distance, but because they needed the space to realize what just happened. The mess tent at noon was a drum of heat and noise, diesel fumes mixed with burned coffee and powdered eggs. Conversations bounced off the metal roof, loud and formless, the kind of chatter that fills a room when nobody's saying anything important. Lieutenant Commander Reeves walked in alone, tray in hand, sleeves rolled to regulation. The noise dipped, not silent, but noticeable. Heads turned, then turned away. She joined the food line without acknowledging anyone. At the center table, Gunnery Sergeant Pierce sat with his back to her, mid-laugh. Corporal Deeks and Lance Corporal Rayner flanked him, voices pitched just below mockery but loud enough to carry. And then she walks in like she's still running Black Ops, Deeks was saying. Clipboard in one hand, stopwatch in the other. Swear to God she'd drown if she ever had to carry real weight. Pierce grinned. Keep talking like that, Corporal, and she'll have you running laps till you puke. She likes her power quiet. That got a laugh. Rayner leaned in. Easy to act calm when you never left the fob. Desk seals, man. They hand those tridents out with the medical discharge paperwork now. Nyla moved 1 space forward in line. Her expression didn't change, but the air around her seemed to thicken, like the room was holding its breath without realizing it. When she reached the serving window, the cook froze mid-scoop. Ma'am, just the tray, she said, setting it down. She took her food, chicken, rice, vegetables she probably wouldn't finish, and walked straight toward the table that had gone too quiet too fast. Set her tray down across from them. The scrape of metal on metal cut through the murmurs like a blade. Deeks blinked. Didn't think officers ate with the enlisted. This is a training facility, Nyla said evenly, unfolding her napkin. Not a country club. Rayner smirked, nudging Deeks with his elbow. Guess paperwork needs supervision now. A few scattered chuckles rippled down the row. Nervous, testing the waters. Nyla's eyes lifted from her plate. Discipline starts with your mouth, Corporal. The tent went quieter. Even the fans overhead seemed to hesitate. Deeks leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice louder now, meant for the crowd. What's that, ma'am? Can't hear you through all the paperwork. Pierce said nothing, just watched, waiting for the crack, the mistake, the emotional reaction he could weaponize later. Nyla didn't give him one. She sat perfectly still, eyes steady, jaw relaxed. The silence stretched. Somewhere behind them, a plastic fork snapped in half. And then Deeks did it. A short, wet sound. Sharp enough to echo off the metal floor, the spit hit her right cheekbone and slid down toward her jaw. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "Jesus Christ." The clatter of trays stopped completely. 100 eyes locked on one small bead of saliva tracking its way down her face. Nyla didn't flinch, didn't wipe it, didn't move at all. Her breathing stayed even, measured inhales through the nose, controlled exhales. The kind of breathing you learn when you're waiting for an IED to detonate and you're trying not to let your hands shake. Pierce's smirk widened. Now she'll snap. Nyla's voice came out level, quiet enough that everyone had to lean in to hear it. "Corporal?" Deke straightened instinctively. "When you're done disrespecting your uniform," she said, "you'll scrub this floor, every inch, before chow ends." Her tone didn't rise, didn't waver. It wasn't anger. It was judgment carved into stone and delivered without appeal. Then she stood, lifted her tray, and walked toward the exit. Nobody moved until she was gone. The tent felt suddenly airless, heavy. Raynor's voice cracked the silence first. "Dude, you're screwed." Deeks tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "Relax, she can't do anything. Everyone saw her freeze?" From the far end of the tent, a quiet voice spoke up. She didn't freeze. She just didn't need to react. Pierce exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. For the first time all week, he didn't look certain. Outside, through the tent flap, Nyla's silhouette crossed into the glare, straight-backed, unmoved, walking toward the equipment lockers like nothing had happened. Inside, nobody picked up their conversations again. Nobody wanted to be the first voice heard after that kind of silence. The locker bay was empty, except for the slow drip of condensation from overhead pipes. The air smelled like canvas and oil, cleaner than the mess tent, but still thick with everything she'd just carried out of it. Lieutenant Commander Reeves set her tray down on the metal bench and stood in front of the long mirror that ran across the far wall. The streak on her cheek had dried, a pale, salt-crusted trail against darker skin. She didn't reach for a towel right away, just studied it, the shape, the insult made visible. Then she picked up a cloth, wiped once, firm, deliberate, and dropped it into the disposal bin. The sound of the lid closing was sharper than it needed to be. She exhaled through her nose, slow, deep, the way they'd taught her back in Buds, when the surf was so cold it felt like needles, and her body was shaking too hard to hold anything steady. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 6. Control the breath, control the body, control everything that wants to collapse. A memory flickered. The beach at night. Salt water filling her nose and mouth while instructors shouted over the roar of the waves, "Still think you belong here, Reeves?" She hadn't answered then either. Just kept crawling through the sand while someone poured another bucket of seawater over her head. One of them had spit at her too. Seawater mixed with contempt. She'd kept crawling. The memory dissolved as quickly as it came. She straightened her collar, checked her reflection once more. No emotion, just the faint shine of discipline, looking back. On her way out, she passed 2 recruits near the door. They went silent instantly, back to side without being told. She didn't look at them. Didn't need to. They felt the weight of her presence like gravity pulling them straighter. The admin corridor was cooler. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, constant and sterile. She walked it like a straight line she'd already measured in her head, every step exact, every breath deliberate. When she reached Captain Adair's office, the door was open. He was bent over paperwork, glasses halfway down his nose, pen clicking against the desk in a rhythm he probably didn't notice. Older, steady. The kind of officer who'd seen enough to recognize control when it walked into his office. "Commander Reeves," he said, glancing up. "Wasn't expecting you until next week's eval." She stopped in front of his desk. "Requesting authorization for hostile condition reflex recertification drill, sir." He blinked. "After lunch?" "No, sir. After sunset." He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "You're not due for that assessment until next quarter." "I know." He set the pen down carefully. "You looking to prove something?" Commander? She met his eyes without hesitation. No, sir. Just need to remind a few people what proof looks like. A beat of silence. And then a faint nod. All right, authorization granted. She took the signed form, folded it once, and turned to leave. Commander, Adair called after her. She paused in the doorway. Whatever this is, he said quietly, make sure it ends on discipline. Her answer came without hesitation. That's the only way it ever ends, sir. And then she was gone. Boots clicking down the corridor measured as a heartbeat. By late afternoon, the concrete outside Range 2 shimmered like it was trying to evaporate. The ocean breeze had picked up, but did nothing to cool the heat baking into the walls. It just made the gossip travel faster. Corporal Deeks leaned against a support beam near the water station, arms crossed. Posture too casual. He was mid-story again, spinning a version of events that made him sound sharp and unshaken. She didn't even react, he told a cluster of younger Marines. Just walked off like a broken robot. That's not strength. That's weird. Rayner chuckled beside him. Swear she blinked slower than a security camera. The laughter came easy, but not unanimous. Across the lot, a few recruits exchanged uncertain looks. They'd been there. They'd seen her face, seen what didn't move. Private Herrera didn't join in. He quietly set down his water bottle and walked away. Not in protest, not in agreement, just away. Pierce had heard every word. He stood off to the side, arms folded, jaw tight. He hadn't laughed once. Something about the way she looked at Deeks, the precision in her tone, had burrowed under his skin like a splinter he couldn't pull out. Inside the equipment shed, Neela Reeves was checking loadouts. Not for combat, for clarity. Rubber rifles, prop vests, infrared flash beacons, comms units with backup channels. She moved through the inventory like a surgeon laying out instruments before an operation. One by one, no wasted motion, no second guessing. Chief Petty Officer Lang entered without knocking. Clipboard in hand, baseball cap pulled low. He'd been around long enough to see drills for what they were, even when they weren't marked that way on paper. You running reflex research tonight? He asked. I am. You want it logged as standard rotation or specialized prep? She looked up. Log it. Lang squinted slightly. Something special about this one? Nyla held up one of the prop rifles, checked its balance, and handed it back. Accuracy. That was all she said. Lang wrote something down and didn't press further. He'd seen operators prep for live fire with less focus than this. She clipped the finalized drill packet to the door panel, signed it with one quick stroke, and handed him the participant roster. Pierce, Deeks, Rayner, 2 control recruits. Lang flipped through the names, paused. You want them briefed before entry? No, I want them confused. A small grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Still got that edge, Commander. She didn't smile, just gave a single nod. Lang turned to leave, then paused at the door. You planning to teach them something tonight? Neela checked her watch. The sun would be down in 2 hours. I don't teach, she said quietly. I demonstrate. Outside, the heat was beginning to break. Shadows stretched longer across the range. Somewhere in the distance, a whistle blew and boots hit gravel in unison. But something else had started to rise. Not tension, not anger, readiness. And it wasn't coming from the men on the roster. It was coming from her. At exactly 1900 hours, the floodlights over Range 7 dropped from white to deep red. The temperature had cooled just enough for the dust to settle and the air to go still. The simulated urban village stood silent. A skeleton of cinder blocks, plywood interiors, half-constructed stairwells, and shadows that moved wrong in the low light. Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves stood at the range entrance, hands behind her back, clipboard tucked under one arm, infrared goggles slung around her neck. Her stance was formal, clean, but still, across from her, 5 selected participants adjusted their gear. Gunnery Sergeant Pierce clipped on his vest with forced nonchalance. Deeks chewed gum he wasn't supposed to have. Rayner fidgeted with the strap on his knee pads. The 2 control recruits stood slightly apart, quiet, wide-eyed, watching every movement she made. No one spoke. Then she began. This is reflex certification under restricted light conditions. Hostage scenario, confined space, no live fire, prop weapons only. Infrared tags mark successful contact. Deeks yawned, loud and exaggerated. Hope the hostages aren't allergic to paper cuts. Nyla's eyes didn't move. You'll run in pairs. Rotation starts on my call. Comm channels are live. Movement within perimeter only. No deviation from protocol. Pierce folded his arms across his chest. Are we scoring this or just going through the motions? Nyla looked at him just once, just long enough. You'll know, she said, when it ends. The silence after that was heavier than any order she could have given. She tapped her radio. Comm check. Lang's voice crackled back from the observation tower. Comm's clear, visuals hot, ready on your call, Commander. Nyla nodded. First pair, Deeks and Rayner, entry point 1. Move. They moved into the structure, boots loud against concrete. The moment the shadows swallowed them, their bravado faded. Inside, the red light distorted depth perception. Corners stretched longer. Doorways felt narrower, and every sound echoed in ways it shouldn't. Where's the damn beacon? Rayner muttered into his mic. Deeks chuckled. Probably hidden in her ego. From her position outside, Neela's radio picked up every word. Then came the scuff of boots. The edge of a shadow cutting across plywood. Deeks rounded a fake corridor, spotted the beacon on a shelf, moved forward to grab it, and froze. Neela was already there. She didn't lunge, didn't shout. She pivoted behind him, one arm hooked under his shoulder and swept his legs clean. He landed flat on his back, hard. The wind knocked out of him in one sharp gasp. His rifle prop clattered across the concrete floor. Rayner saw it happen, tried to rush in, half-formed yell in his throat. Nyla turned, slipped under his swing like water, took out his legs with a single rotation, and pinned him with a forearm across the sternum. The beacon blinked red beside his head. Pair 1, she said into the radio, voice calm, neutralized. Lang's voice came back, stunned. Copy that. Pierce stepped into the perimeter next, tension in his shoulders like he'd already lost but couldn't admit it yet. Neela didn't wait for him to get comfortable. She advanced through the next room with precision, shoulders low, breath invisible, movement deliberate. When Pierce finally caught sight of her, he charged, not tactically, not smart, just pure forward motion driven by pride. She sidestepped, hooked his wrist mid-swing, flipped his balance forward, brought him to his knees with one hand pressed to the back of his neck. He tried to rise. She didn't push harder. She just held. You planned this, he gasped. You set this whole thing up. She leaned in, voice so quiet only he could hear it. No, you did. When you thought silence meant I didn't have options. Then she let him go. He slumped forward, breathing hard. The control recruits stood frozen at the end of the room, still gripping their rifles, unsure if they were still part of the drill or just witnesses now. Nyla turned to them. Status? One finally managed to answer. Standing by, ma'am. Good. She stepped back into the red light, goggles still lifted, and spoke to the room. To the comms channel. To everyone listening from the tower. This, she said, is what control looks like when it's earned. Then she tapped her radio one last time. Simulation complete. Extract personnel. Lang's voice came through. Clear, stunned. Copy. Drill logged. Outside the building, the breeze had picked up again. Cool now, almost cold. But inside range 7, not a single man moved without her signal. The sun was barely up when the review convened in the East Wing briefing room. The air smelled like varnished wood and old brass, an institutional scent that made everyone sit a little straighter without being told. Captain Adair stood behind a plain oak desk, sleeves rolled to his forearms, no jacket. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. On the right side of the room sat Lieutenant Commander Nyla Reeves, uniform pressed, hands folded over her clipboard. On the left, Gunnery Sergeant Pierce, Corporal Deeks, and Lance Corporal Rayner shifted in their chairs like men waiting for a verdict they already knew. Along the back wall stood 5 recruits, Herrera among them. They hadn't been called, but their presence said enough. Lang stood near the door, arms crossed, face unreadable. Adair didn't look up from the intake report right away. He let the silence build. Then he spoke. This is a misconduct review under Article 6, conduct in the presence of superior officers. We're here to address yesterday's incident in the mess tent. He looked up over his glasses. Does anyone wish to speak before I begin questioning? Silence. Then from the back, a voice, nervous but steady. Sir, permission to speak? Adair glanced up. Name. Private Herrera, sir. Go ahead. Herrera stepped forward slightly. I was at the table, sir. I saw everything. Adair raised an eyebrow. Be specific. Herrera swallowed hard. Corporal Deke spit in Commander Reeves's face. The silence snapped tight like a wire pulled taut. Did she retaliate? No, sir. She told him to clean the floor. Knew, then walked out. And what was your impression of the act, Private? Herrera glanced briefly at Deeks, then back at Adair. Disgraceful, sir. Adair turned his attention to the others. Private Melton? Another recruit spoke up from the back. I was there too, sir. It wasn't a joke. Everyone knew what it was. Deeks leaned forward, hands on his knees. We were just blowing off steam. It got out of hand. I didn't mean... That's a lie. Another voice cut in. You were waiting for her to react. You wanted it to escalate. Adair held up one hand. The room fell silent again immediately. He turned to Rayner. Corporal, do you contest any of these accounts? Rayner lowered his head. No, sir. Adair's gaze moved slowly to Pierce. Sergeant? Pierce opened his mouth, hesitated, then closed it again without saying a word. Neela hadn't moved. Her eyes didn't flicker. She just sat there, perfectly still, like a stone in a river, while everything else rushed past. Adair tapped the edge of the desk once with his knuckle. This is what I see, he said. A superior officer subjected to public humiliation. No provocation, no escalation, only restraint. And yet, somehow, it was you three who lost control. He looked directly at Neela. Commander Reeves, why didn't you file a formal complaint? She answered without looking at the others. Because the system corrects itself, sir. Eventually. If you let it watch long enough. Adair nodded slowly. It has. He picked up the sheet he'd prepared ahead of time and read from it without emotion. Corporal Deeks, you are suspended from all training activities effective immediately. Your file will be submitted to Base Review Board for formal reprimand and potential discharge. Deeks' shoulders slumped. Lance Corporal Rayner, your failure to intervene and active participation in unprofessional conduct earns you the same suspension pending review. Rayner nodded once, already defeated. Gunnery Sergeant Pierce, you allowed the atmosphere to fester under your watch. You are removed from instructional rotation and reassigned to support logistics effective immediately. Pierce flinched, but didn't argue. Adair turned to Neela one last time. Commander Reeves, your conduct under direct provocation is formally noted. A recommendation for exemplary ethics and instructional discipline is being submitted to Regional Command. She gave a short nod. Thank you, sir. Adair closed the folder with a soft thud. Dismissed. No one spoke on the way out. Not even the ones who'd come to watch. The echo of boots on tile was the only sound marking their exit. But for the first time since she'd stepped onto Pier 43, Nyla walked out of that room not as the woman who'd been disrespected, but as the one everyone now respected without needing to be told. The mess tent looked the same, but it didn't sound the same. Trays clinked, forks scraped, boots crossed the linoleum with careful rhythm. But the volume had dropped. Conversations that used to spill across tables now stayed tucked beneath breath. It wasn't fear, it was adjustment. The kind that happens when the rules get rewritten and everyone's still figuring out how to walk under them. Lieutenant Commander Reeves entered alone. No clipboard, no stopwatch. Just the same boots and the same posture she'd always carried. But when she stepped inside, the temperature of the room changed. Private Herrera stood from his table. Not a salute, not a spectacle, just stood, quiet and respectful, like acknowledging the shift he'd helped set in motion. Others didn't rise, but they straightened. And more importantly, no one looked away. Gunnery Sergeant Pierce sat alone near the end of the tent. His tray was untouched, his coffee steaming in front of him. Eyes fixed somewhere past the steam, staring at nothing. His sleeves were rolled down today. No swagger, no smirk, just silence. Deeks and Rayner were gone. Not transferred officially yet. Not reassigned. Just absent. Their names had stopped appearing on rosters, and their seats at the back table hadn't been claimed by anyone else. Neela walked the length of the tent without pausing. Served herself. Same portions, same routine. She passed Pierce without comment and sat 3 tables down, facing the rear exit, her back never to the room. Not because she feared anything, just habit. The kind you carry when you've spent enough time outside the wire to know comfort is a luxury leaders can't afford. Chief Petty Officer Lang slid into the seat across from her without asking. His tray was half finished, his posture loose in that veteran kind of way. Hell of a correction, he said quietly. She didn't look up from her food. Corrections end. He waited. She took a bite, chewed slowly, then added, Standard stay. Lang nodded. They're different now. They're watching now, that's enough. He didn't argue, just ate beside her in silence. The kind 2 people share when they have already said everything that needs saying. Across the tent, a new group of recruits filtered in. Fresh faces, no context, no baggage. But the ones already seated didn't need to explain. They made room. They adjusted. They didn't laugh when Nyla passed, didn't comment when she refilled her coffee, didn't try to fill the silence she carried with noise. She finished her meal in full, rose, carried her tray to the disposal bin. No parade, no ceremony, just footsteps and discipline moving through space. Outside, the air had cooled. The wind off the Pacific caught the edge of her sleeves as she stepped onto the pier, sunset cutting long shadows across the docks. She paused at the railing. Same spot where she'd first stood when she arrived weeks ago. The waves below weren't loud. Just constant, soft rhythm brushing against concrete and steel. Behind her, drills continued in the compound. Shouts sharper now, cadence cleaner. Someone called out a completion time that beat the morning record by 4 seconds. Captain Adair passed by on his return from the admin wing. He didn't stop until he was shoulder to shoulder with her. They didn't look at each other, just stood there, 2 officers watching the same horizon. You could have retaliated, he said finally. I did, Neela replied, eyes still forward. By teaching. He gave a faint nod, then stepped away. No congratulations, no handshake, just understanding passing silently between them. She watched the light fade, arms still, breathing even. The cheek that had once carried spit now carried only the salt breeze, and behind her, the discipline she'd fought for walked on in the boots of others, every step steadier than the last. Would you have stayed silent after someone spit in your face? Or do you think discipline hits harder than rage? Should humiliation be answered with force? Or with proof? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story reminded you what real control looks like, hit that like button, subscribe with the bell turned on, and share this with someone who still mistakes silence for surrender. Our next mission is already waiting on your screen. Go watch it now. I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.